Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 30 team selection. We'll be covering how my team did in Gameweek 29, what my general thoughts are going forwards, and then we'll also be unpacking the data for this week for Gameweek 30 and some of the projections that we have. Then moving into my Gameweek 30 team selection and also my transfer plans, updated now post some of the Champions League results that we've had earlier in this week. As a Real Madrid fan, I am over the moon recording this video right now after the 3-0 win versus Man City. That does change some things with chip strategy, but I don't think it's a massive impact. I think if you kind of look at Ben Kroen's, for example, latest tweet on this, it's pretty clear that actually the impacts that we think in terms of the postponements, despite, let's say, Real Madrid more likely or more than likely, of course, going to qualify over, let's say, Man City to the next stage of the Champions League, is not going to have a massive impact in terms of the amount of doubles that we're going to have in Game Week 33. I think we've had a little bit of overreaction to it. I'm also going to shout out my chip strategy video that I dropped yesterday and have spent a lot of time on it. It kind of focuses around, what the impacts are of the FA Cup quarterfinals, how to understand them, how we feel about postponements. Now, of course, it doesn't take into account, let's say, the Real Madrid result versus Man City, but I think it's really important in terms of establishing if you're going to have a City double versus if you're going to have a Liverpool double in Gaming 33 and how you should feel about that from a fixture planning perspective. Additionally, I share my thoughts in terms of, what you could do, for example, in situations where you've already used a wild card, already used a free hit, already used it or the triple captaincy, which is kind of like the more conventional routes that a lot of us managers have done. And it also details, I think, something to think about in terms of why we need specifically to actually save our free chances as much as possible as we head towards Game Week 32. So it's something I wanted to shout out. And if you've been enjoying the content, including, let's say, the team selection videos and the cheat sheets, please feel free to subscribe. We're trying to get to 50,000 at the end of the season. That would be the absolute dream goal, including the World Cup. And do also like and subscribe if you want to support a video, or actually, sorry, like and comment, because that really does help with the algorithm. And we're trying to sort of pick things up towards the tail end of the season as we try to finish on high. So for Game Week 29, how did my team do? I got 62 points in the end. 62 points because mostly of the, differential impact of Arsenal. Otherwise, my team was absolutely awful. I think a lot of people had auto subs across the board. I mean, I had auto subs myself as well, but only 4 points and 5 points from the Enzos. Not so good as, the Elliot Andersons of the world, the Sinestis of the world. So you didn't have amazing auto sub jam in light of everyone else's. But I'm very happy to have the differential haul from Arsenal. Don't have Semenyo, don't have João Pedro, who have obviously been pretty hurtful in terms of rank, but not massively because, of course, we're having our own differentials hauling. And we talked about, how good of a pick João Pedro is. With Semenyo, I still think there are generally pretty good reasons why I've avoided him. He's done amazingly, and of course, he's delivered with the minutes. I think that's going to change a little bit with Doku coming back into the team. We've seen that already within the Man City games recently, within the cup matches. So for me, that's going to stay kind of the same. I feel like we're almost in the point of the season where a lot of people are questioning the value that value has in FPL, because players like Haaland, players like Salah are still playing really poorly. Like, for example, if you wanted to criticize Haaland as well, because we've criticized Salah all season long, I think, and to be fair to Haaland, his recent performances have been really poor, not just in terms of, has he scored goals and assists, but also when you're actually looking at, let's say, recent underlying performance. So the kind of XG per game, the XG per 90 per game has sort of slowly been decaying over the course of the season. And I think maybe that could be changes in terms of the team dynamics, like, for example, O'Reilly and Semenyo, integrating themselves into different positions in the team, or equally, of course, his own personal performance has dropped off, and we now have possibly the only consistent option in FPL being Bruno Fernandes. And I'm strongly considering him now as a captain. I vice-captained him last week. I captained Haaland, and it didn't work out quite so nicely. So that's kind of the position we're in. At the same time, I think a lot of us are looking to target a team like Tottenham, right? They're absolutely there for the taking. But then you look at a team like Liverpool as well. They had a great fixture versus Wolves, and they also were pretty flat versus Wolves. So I'm not sure if it's so obvious or clear and obvious, to kind of just say that we have obvious captaincies going forward. So I feel like despite as good as the fixtures as this Haaland game is, or this Ekitike is, I don't know. I think Bruno just kind of screams as a good captaincy option for this week, just because I feel like there's ways to pick holes at, every other argument, especially with, the overall piece being that for all the teams invested in Europe, which is Chelsea and City, they're still going to put their best foot forward versus PSG and Real Madrid in the next leg when they're playing at home. With Ekitike as well, I mean, we know he can't really manage too many fixtures, off the bounce, and he does sort of have to manage his minutes. Now, that's kind of meant that he's not been able to play, or for example, he's been rested in the FA Cup, which is perfect for Ekitike. But something also to kind of think about in terms of your consideration for captaincy. Another wider point that I wanted to make is when you look at a player like, for example, like I have Timber in my team, who I've kept because I think he's a good differential, and I really thought that Arsenal were still good value for just holding because of the quality of the defense this season. I mean, he could still be benched, for example, versus Everton at home. But it's very hard for me to legislate benching for him and trying to over predict that when he's in my team. So all we can really do at this stage of the season, as is proven, for example, by the Anderson and the Wilson sort of auto subs that I needed this week, when they were actually playing a really good game on paper versus West Ham at home, is you need a strong team. You need strong depth, because you don't really know who's going to be coming in and out of the squads, unless you obviously have leaks before the deadline, which unfortunately we don't have many leaks from many teams. So that's just the reality of things, and sometimes you just have to call upon your bench. And so I think something to think about as we head towards a blank Game Week 31 is, how deep is your team? Otherwise, also that goes with the competing advice that I will give, which is basically try to roll your free transfers up until Game Week 32. If you're interested into why, it's because of when we get information drops in FPL, and my chip strategy video does cover that. So as I said, have a look at that if you have some time and want to listen to my thoughts about that. But let's just jump into the data for this week. So once again, this is sort of provided by alonify.com. I wanted to talk about a little bit about the importance of using models, and also trying to kind of marry that up with your own understanding of things, and also trying to understand that that's going to be separate from, let's say, market level data. So the point of a lot of models is that you can kind of find, let's say, I guess, almost another subjective view on interpreting the Premier League fixtures. So someone might actually look at these kind of model projections and think that's a little bit absurd, that the markets are a little bit more precise, which I think is not necessarily true. A lot of the 11.5 model data has proven to be actually very competitive against the market, season long, and even last season. But you'll probably pick out at things like, for example, why is Liverpool's expected goals not higher when Spurs look like an absolute train wreck of a team? 2.24 is still the highest this week as projected by Alonify. But is it as high as, let's say, the markets are projecting the Liverpool game to be? I don't think so. I think the markets are projecting something like 2.4, and it could go higher up, right, as we head towards the deadline, and we get more sharp information and whether that changes. So that's a pretty big impact. But I think the important thing to kind of think about here is sometimes we might also be overcorrecting. Like, yes, of course, Spurs look like an absolutely terrible team, but are they absolutely terrible to the extent that you'd completely change your expectations of them, more so than, okay, this is 3 to 4 game weeks of sample size on top of a larger body of sample size? That's the kind of thing that we're trying to look at here. And I think it's important to marry the two sometimes, because these kind of arguments can help us discuss, why we think maybe Ekitike could be a better captaincy this week. Because I think sometimes from a modeling point of view, yes, of course, it has like an objective approach in the sense that, okay, you have a subjective view on how the model should manage data. And let's say Spurs have played 3 to 4 poor games on the bounce, but you also have a history of information. But then someone will counter and say, okay, Igor Tudor is now in charge. You should really only look at the games that Igor Tudor is managing. And I think that's a fair point to an extent, but it's very hard to say that the 3 to 4 games with Igor Tudor are completely illustrative of what the future is going to be. Because we've obviously had big manager bounces. This is obviously probably the worst and largest opposite to a new manager bounce. But my point is to say, if even a model, for example, spits out Liverpool as the top game, you know how good that game is. And if the markets are even more aggressive, I feel like, go with your own sort of gut in terms of what is better information to use, or what you feel about at this moment in time, because things can shift very, very quickly for teams, and this is only one illustrative sort of guide on how you can approach things. I think what's helpful about data is it's generally objective in terms of, as I said, if you have a consistent approach to modeling and all the teams are modeled in the same way, that interpret or data is interpreted in the same way as well. And so that's kind of how we have these projections. So what I mean to say with this long amble is try to go with your gut, but understand that there's an opportunity for, let's say, information to be very different from different sources. And if you want to back, for example, what you think the most from a subjective point of view, go for it. This is what FPL is for. So that preamble side, Liverpool and City have the best goals. I am a bit worried about sort of backing City, generally speaking. Like, I just think West Ham are looking like such a great team. Now, Somerville might be out, and that's obviously terrible news for this game, but I still think that West Ham team has been very good. Like, even if you look at the FA Cup performance versus Brentford, I mean, they racked up a lot of XG versus Brentford without Somerville on the pitch. They did also concede a lot of XG, in fairness, and even a penalty. But yeah, I mean, City don't look like an absolutely great team. You don't know how much City will rotate. So it's hard for me to say that, okay, it makes sense to look at City as a captainable game here, despite sort of West Ham being a traditional fixture to target. I like Liverpool. I also like United versus Villa because of how good Bruno is. And then Chelsea actually have a really good game too. So I think for anyone who's looking at players like Thiago from Brentford versus Wolves, or let's say even a João Pedro, for example, if you're really backing the form that João Pedro has and also just the underlying stats that he's had under Senior versus Aston Villa, then that makes sense. But the only thing I'd say is, as much as these numbers are great for teams like Chelsea or even teams like, let's say, a Liverpool, I think the question is going to be how many minutes, as I said, is going to be extended for all the players that we want to kind of look at captaincy options, which means that going back even to, let's say, an option like Bruno with only just 1.7 expected goals versus Aston Villa could actually be a pretty healthy way to kind of approach this, right? Just in terms of thinking about raising that floor at times. Arsenal top of clean sheets, Brentford and Liverpool very, very closely following in behind. Pretty good game for Bournemouth, of course, because they're simply playing versus Burnley. But otherwise, this is a week where you're probably actually just looking to play your next best players, right? There's a lot of kind of both teams to score type games here in terms of Forest versus Fulham, Sunderland versus Brighton as well. Even, for example, Palace versus Leeds. I think that's a very, very close game on paper. All the other games are quite dominant and one-sided. So this week, I think as long as you are backing a lot of these one-sided teams playing at home, most likely, you're probably set up in a good position to do well. But in terms of immediate transfers in, I feel like if you want to invest more into Chelsea this week, I feel like you can. For example, if you have an open spot for João Pedro in your team, and let's say Haaland is injured or not injured, sorry, but like unfit, or we get an inkling that he's going to be benched, then I think João Pedro is actually a really good forward transfer as well. Alongside, of course, that sort of Salah hokey cokey. But honestly, Salah's performance versus Galatasaray was so awful. I just think it still leaves room and doubt for, could he be benched for a game? I think it's plausible. Could he, for example, even just play reduced minutes versus Spurs? I think it's plausible as well. And at that point, is it worth the 2 free transfers when, someone like João Pedro just actually looks like a very serious pick and is just 1 free transfer away? So something to think about for us managers when we get information later this week, particularly on Saturday, on how to sort of interpret that. But those are my thoughts right now. Otherwise, I don't think there's any clear fixture to target outside of Bournemouth, right? So Marcus Tavernier looks like an absolutely exceptional pick. He is right there for the taking if you want to use a transfer this week in the midfield position. In defense, I really feel like most teams have a good defense this week. I don't see any sort of clear and obvious defender that people don't currently own that could be interesting to buy this week. So those are my thoughts just in general in terms of interpreting the data and more so just where you can focus your transfers for this week. As far as my own team for Gameweek 30, I am planning to actually play a rolled team, but I will have one transfer in mind, so do let me know if you prefer option 2. But option 1, as I said, is playing a triple Arsenal defense. Raya, Gabriel, Timber all at home. Timber could be benched, but I am just going to take my chances. It's been nice that White has been out recently. He's now back on the bench, but I feel like still Arsenal are probably going to want to put their best foot forward, and that probably also means Timber playing. The last time I actually thought Timber could be benched was actually when they were playing Brentford away, it was away from home, I believe. And I thought, maybe White could play, and as it turns out, Timber's just simply played. So Timber, we know he's been sort of robust enough to sort of play 3 games in a row. Does he look absolutely tired, exhausted? Yes. And we've seen, of course, Mosquera come in for Spurs. We've seen restings, for example, in cup fixtures. But yeah, I'm actually looking forward to play Timber here. Virgil versus Tottenham home is an obvious one. We don't really need to discuss that too much further. In the midfield, though, I am planning to play Wilson. Now, Wilson has a big question mark and a big sort of asterisk because we don't know what exactly is going on with him. I believe FPL Harry pointed out from someone who kind of kindly pointed out to him that on the Peter Crouch podcast, apparently Harry Wilson mentioned that he still has a knock, and I think that was recorded on Monday. So that's still pretty recent, and that's not good news in terms of, I think, even, for example, the minutes of Wilson. Like, for example, if he has a knock and he's managing that and he's coming back, Could he, for example, be coming off the bench? Could he potentially just be playing reduced minutes? I have him playing right now because I'm hoping that we get a better and more positive update from Marco Silva. But Jack Kelly is also a great journalist that we can actually follow on Twitter ahead of the deadline as well. I think he tends to give very sort of FPL pointed questions and get those answered for us within press conferences. So have a look at what he, kind of transcribes Marco Silva to say, and maybe we can actually get some information on Wilson. So for now, I'm starting him, but I actually think that I'm increasingly thinking maybe Enzo Lefebvre or Maguire just need to be called upon instead, if I just don't think that I can get the minutes right with Wilson. Because it's still, at the end of the day, Nottingham Forest away. I don't think it's that good of a fixture compared to, let's say, the more recent games in terms of Tottenham at home, West Ham at home, and of course the next game in Game Week 31, which is going to be Burnley at home, which is the banker, right? Enzo versus Newcastle, I'm actually looking forward to play him. He had a 1 goal, 1 assist performance in the Champions League. Just seems like a very consistent pick. And I think, we talked about the argument within the cheat sheet video of why do I think Enzo Fernandez is still a very, very good pick in FPL, even in spite of, let's say, I guess in theory, people saying that his performance, sin Palmer with Palmer, is much worse than, let's say, his performances early in the season. I think that kind of PSG game is a nice sort of reminder that he can absolutely do well from a fantasy sense with Palmer on the pitch rather, and that it's not as much of an impediment as people think. Szoboszlai, obvious play. Bruno, we'll talk about captaincy, but obviously he's getting played. And that's my midfield for this week. In terms of the forward line, because we moved into that sort of 3-4 structure recently, Thiago, Ekitike, Haaland all have amazing games. All will be played. But I am waiting for potential information, right? So, for example, if let's say Haaland is benched, I think it's more than likely I just simply go for João Pedro as the transfer. I simply can't care enough about Haaland anymore. I don't have any wish to sort of go for Salah. That would probably mean that I actually have to go out of Sobo as well within my team and take a hit. So that's not happening. But Haaland to João Pedro is firmly on the cards if that's going to happen. Now, the alternative sort of play that I'll do with this sort of option 1 team is if Wilson is, let's say, not in a position to sort of be fit for this game in Game Week 30, then I think I might play either Enzo Lefebvre or Maguire. I am completely between two minds in this. I think Lefebvre is fun in the sense that his ownership is really low, in the sense that he's a midfielder, so it's always a little bit, I guess, more fun to cheer for a midfielder. But backing Maguire could make sense with Bruno as well, right? There's even a small sort of backing of the Man United clean sheet here. I mean, as a potential Bruno capper, that's 2 clean sheets that I guess I'm hoping, or two points from clean sheets that I could possibly get from Bruno. From Maguire, that would just be topped up. So there's a little bit of that kind of homogenous outcome piece there with Maguire too, and also just backing, generally speaking, a United sort of favored result, right? With them playing at home and with Villa, unfortunately, just not turning up for a lot of their recent games of football. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to do with making that decision between Lefebvre and Maguire, if I don't feel confident that Wilson's going to play the minutes that I want. So I can easily see myself sort of putting Wilson maybe like second on bench and having Lefebvre and Maguire ahead of him. But I haven't made that decision yet because we don't have the information that we currently need. But I think we will get it. And to me, that's, as I said, more of a 50-50 type decision, or a 33 decision for myself because, well, I don't have the information right now. And I think they're all very close as picks because this is not, for example, a cream of the crop Wilson fixture where he's so obviously a play. And Anderson, I'm just going to keep him at the back of my bench this week because I don't really 100% know that he's going to be benched again or just starting, which I kind of expect. And I still think he has a worse game than Maguire, so I'm going to play Maguire ahead of him. In terms of captaincy this week, I think my captaincy will be on Bruno. As much as I love Tottenham at home as a fixture to target, and that's why I bought Wilson in 2 weeks back, I still think Bruno is a better pick. He's just more consistent, more routes towards points, and I can trust his minutes wholeheartedly. So, for example, if Ekitike needs to get subbed off a little bit earlier just so that he can be managed for this Galatasaray game, I don't have to think about that with Bruno. And that's what I'm looking for in a captaincy, right? Someone who can actually haul even at the 95th minute. If the fixture is close enough, right, for example, to someone who has a top fixture or a better fixture, right, and arguably less minutes. So that's basically what I'm looking forward to do. In terms of option 2, though, if I was to actually make a transfer this week and it wasn't, for example, forced upon me, like, for example, Haaland being out of the squad, or, if we get a leak around Man City, then my plan actually is to consider actually an Enzo Lefebvre to Tavernier transfer. Ultimately, I think I have a stable enough-ish team for my team in Gaming 31. As I mentioned, I've got Virgil, Maguire, Anderson, and then of course I've got eight players in terms of attacking positions. The only thing that is the reason why I don't really want to make this transfer right now is there's still a possibility with Delict, seen in I believe maybe seen in training or at least seen in the training grounds. Delict could be coming back soon. Martinez could be coming back soon. Is there a possibility for Maguire to not feature in Gaming 31? I think that's rather unlikely. I think Maguire should be fine, especially for Gaming 31, because I think for Delict to come back, he kind of has to be reintegrated very slowly into the team. I can't see him starting immediately. So to me, I think Maguire is fine. But Anderson, I'm not really 100% sure of. I know Issa Diop has put in some good performances as of late. I wouldn't be completely shocked if Anderson suddenly found himself out of the squad. So I want to leave myself with that element of doubt. I don't want to force myself using 2 free transfers back to back, because suddenly if I'm called upon to make a Gameweek 31 transfer for a defender, then I would feel a lot worse, heading towards a potential wildcard in Gameweek 32 with 0 free transfers banked and just simply relying on the wildcard to kind of do the rest of it. But that could be exactly what is needed in FPL, and maybe that could be fine. But I would like at least the security blanket of 1 role transfer. 2 role transfers is what I'm opting for, which is why option number 2 doesn't really interest me now. But if I had no issues with this team and I felt super confident about Anderson as well, super confident about Wilson, and not confident about Wilson this week, which is why I probably needed another player, I would have considered an Enzo Lefebvre to Tavernier. But I feel like for other FPL managers where maybe, let's say, you're holding maybe a dead midfield spot or something else, I think Tavernier is an amazing transfer. But Tavernier and João Pedro are definitely my transfer targets this week, just depending on the information that we get. In defense, I feel like I'm fine. I feel like generally for most people, our defenses are fine. So I probably wouldn't touch that too much. And that's kind of how I feel about this week as well, in terms of it's a bit unfortunate how we've soured our tastes on Haaland and Salah. And even arguably Palmer and Saka are not that enticing in FPL. So I'm kind of hoping that as we get more information, as we head towards Game Week 32, that we get enough information to sort of want to use the money in FPL. And hopefully if I do wildcard in 32, then I get to spend all that money and set up that bench boost in 33 for hopefully what is, not just Burnley players and Brighton players. So let's see how things go. Thank you guys so much for watching. And we'll quickly jump into the transfer plans. So we're at the back here with the Fantasy Football Hub My Team Pick and Rating tool. As I said, you can find the link in the description below to use the tool. But it seems like I actually have a really good team this game. 97% rated is really good. The fact that I still want to do a free transfer is probably concerning to myself. I think I'm asking too much. Maybe the team is already set up in a really, really good spot here and I'm overreacting. And as I said, I think I do have maybe a small Anderson-sized issue and a small Wilson issue. Maybe just wait to get more information so I can adequately address that in Game Week 31. It's interesting that the model actually prefers Maguire to Enzo Lefebvre here. And I think as we've discussed previously, Wilson's probably only projected 3 points because of the reduced minutes kind of taken into account with the potential injury. But yeah, I probably will play Maguire over Lefebvre. So interesting kind of like confirmation bias there. But in Game Week 31, if I roll, I think the clear thing here is that I have still a solid team, especially with Virgil coming into the squad. That's 11 players. But I think it's possible that, let's say, Anderson, I don't know. I mean, could he be benched for Burnley at home? I sure hope not, because that's an amazing fixture. But if I have to make another defensive transfer, we've been saying it for weeks, but Chow is right there with Sunderland at home, sorry. And then also we've got, if we want to just replace like for like almost, then we've got Anderson that can be moved into Tete or into another center back within the team, right? Like a Diop or even a Bassi. But I think I won't tempt myself with that. I think Tete is probably the one that makes the most sense because it feels like he's guaranteed to start games. Whereas I don't know what's going on with the center back situation. Or maybe I'm overreacting to it too much. Otherwise, Lefebvre is someone who I could possibly shift off the team. In the midfield, for example, I think it's curious actually if you just look at specifically this game week that there's no midfielder who really even competes with, let's say, the kind of projected points of, let's say a Chow here, for example, in terms of how much that can improve my team. So Maguire and Enzo Lefebvre are the worst options that I have. They're projected at 3.6 points and 3.7 points. Getting Chow into the team could actually be quite massive if I wanted to make a transfer. At the same time, I guess in the midfield position, let me try to think about other picks. Like, for example, Gordon is only projected 5.1 points. So not that much of an upgrade that I can actually get in the midfield, or I would say even arguably within the forward position, that would kind of warrant using a transfer. Now, is there a need to keep Haaland in my team? Possibly not, right? I mean, João Pedro's right there with 5.4 versus Everton away. But I'll probably just back the projected points here and actually just go for maybe a Chow as an option. Everton doesn't seem that enticing as a fixture for me, particularly because it's an away fixture. But that's kind of how I feel about things at this moment in time. An alternative option, as I said, is going to be Tete with 4.9. But I do think Burnley at home is such a good fixture that I'd love to target that as well. I could reach Gordon, but the only problem is that I can only reach Gordon through Enzo. I can't really reach Gordon now through Enzo Lefebvre. So I'm kind of capped towards a 6.6 midfield replacement. And if I kind of reduce the midfield position to, let's say, 6.6, like what kind of options do we have here? Yeah, no one who's actually remotely close to a defender, or even arguably Tete, right? In this position. Although Elliot Anderson does have Tottenham away, which is pretty enticing, and I'm pretty jealous of people who will have him. So something to think about right there in terms of transfer options. Maybe an Elliot Anderson, maybe a Malik Chow from Newcastle. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with my transfers. And then obviously in Gameweek 32, we're going to wildcard here. But it's very hard to just determine what you want to wildcard to because you need the information of the FA Cup. So between Gameweek 31 and 32, after the Gameweek 31 deadline, you have those FA Cup quarterfinal games being played. You will know who's going to be in the semifinals. You will know sort of whether teams are alive or not within the Champions League or the Conference League or the Europa League. So that kind of information will be helpful because by Gameweek 32, if I've at least rolled, my transfers or at least one of them, then I can wild card knowing, what am I going to do? Or even if I get towards Gameweek 32 and I don't want to wild card, well, at least I think all I'm going to be doing is trying to set up as best as possible a Gameweek 33 bench boost. But it's very hard to do so, I think, with the amount of free transfers I have. So I'm pretty much committed to wild carding on 32. I think the free hit is more than enough as a security blanket because even if, let's say, I flip things around, let's say I free hit on 33 and I wildcarded later, I think that's also a really good alternative, competing solution, right? So as long as you have a wildcard or free hit left, you can manage the rest of the fixtures in my honest opinion. If you wanted to reduce chip strategy to that, that's kind of what my thoughts are, right? But yeah, I do think 33 is going to be the big double. It still should be. And I can't wait to get towards Gaming 32. So I'll see you guys soon for more content and take care and goodbye.